Today we're going to go over one of the most fascinating UFO stories in UFO history. All right, that's the story of Lockheed Martin, which is an advanced aerospace tech company, right? Allegedly having a crashed UFO that they procured going back decades, right? And in 2007 and 2008, there was allegedly a deal set up with a government program called OSAP to potentially transfer it back to the government, right? Because allegedly they had this crashed UFO, couldn't do anything with it, and were prepared to give it back to the government, right? And something happened. It didn't go through, right? But that story still exists, and it's absolutely fascinating. So today we're going to dive into that story. And it all started with a podcast interview with Luis Elizondo, who at one point was a part of OSAP and then ATIP, right, which was the follow-up kind of program to OSAP, right, to study UFOs, the Pentagon's Office to Study UFOs, right? So let's dive into the story and see what it's all about. First, we're going to take a listen to Luis Elizondo, most recently on a podcast just a few days ago, talking about this story. Take a listen.
We're very much like a bacteria. We grow or we will stagnate and die.
And you've helped us grow, Lou. So you've really done a lot to advance the conversation. And I do think you've been in some rooms that many people haven't been in. And there's the things, anytime you're in a room, whether it's in a technology that might be export controlled across technology sectors, or whether it's something that's being close held in industry, there's a lot of things that are competitively held. Just, we don't know the ingredients of Coca-Cola amongst, not the ingredients like the process, right? Amongst many other things. But so could you share with us the things that you say, all right, out of what's shareable, because you get to anchor to some of those very elite programs that there's now things public. What can you share for those that aren't in those rooms?
Yeah, what I can share is the fact that there was an effort by Lockheed Martin, believe it or not, by one of their very senior reps, to offload some of the material, exotic material they had in their possession to one of the groups that I was part of, affiliated with initially, OSAP and ATIP. The program I was mostly entrenched with was ATIP, but its predecessor was OSAP. And there is now a document that was approved for release by the Pentagon through the DOPSR, official DOPSR process, where it talks about that conversation, where there were people in Lockheed Martin that said, hey, we want to offload this exotic material. We've gone as far as we can as far as understanding how it works, and it's expensive to house it. More and more of these scenarios are becoming public. More and more companies are privately. There's a few others that have reached out to me independently and privately. I'm not going to say their names here because I don't have their permission. The only reason why I mentioned Lockheed was because there's documentation on it that's out in the wild. So I can't control that. And that's now publicly available. But there are other companies that have reached out and said the same thing and said, hey, look, we've kind of backed ourselves in the corner. The government told us never to say anything about this. And now we're being kind of pinned the tail on the donkey. We're kind of being put in a bad spot here because we know what we have, but we've been told for many years not to say it. But now we kind of want to say it because people are going to look at us and really not trust us very well. And keep in mind, these are large corporations that have investors. They have CEOs and presidents and boards that they have to constantly make sure that they're giving value to their investors. That's law.
All right. So that document that Luis Elizondo is talking about, I found it, and it's honestly quite fascinating. I'll put a link in the description so you can check it out. There's a lot in it, but one part in particular we're going to focus on. Let me read it to you. The $22 million allocated for DIA OSAP, after speaking to multiple individuals on the program, was originally intended to skiff out Bigelow Airspace facilities in Las Vegas due to a UAP material divestment plan proposed to OSAP leadership by Lockheed Martin Space Systems Vice President Dr. James Ryder, now deceased. A specific facility known to me was described as having crash retrieval material from the 1950s and other historical operations. They proposed a technology transfer agreement, a TTA, into the proposed wave PSAP Senator Reid was championing. So again, I'll put a link in the description to this full document. You can go check it out for yourself. There's a lot more in it. Now, let's get into a few more details about this particular incident, right? Back in 2007, 2008, because you see Lockheed Martin seen right here hiding something on one of their runways that looks, like a UFO or something. I don't know. They're always doing some crazy stuff, right? Is this story, right? Again, just absolutely fascinating, the implications of this, right? And Luis Elizondo isn't the only one that has talked about it, right? I remember Jeremy Corbell months ago putting out a tweet right here that you can see, and then attaching a video that kind of helped explain a little bit more about it. So let's watch that video.
I think it is entirely feasible that this UFO cover-up exists within a private company.
Lockheed Martin.
Or Lockheed.
Lockheed was one of those involved.
Lockheed wanted to divest their NHI, non-human intelligence, UAP or UFO materials, a material transfer of UAP that was supposed to happen to OSAP from Lockheed, and that was shut down specifically by CIA-involved individuals. And there's an individual who was head of science and technology at that time. This craft had a streamlined configuration suitable for aerodynamic flight, but no intakes, no exhaust, no wings or control surfaces. In fact, it appeared not to have an engine, fuel tanks, or fuel. So, is this what they were hoping to get to study from Lockheed? Do you know?
Yeah. Yes.
There is non-human technology, something from somewhere else, whether it's ET or interdimensional, something that we did not make, that crashed, that we've been analyzing, that's been stashed in presumably special access programs, controlled by defense contractors, presumably funded secretly by the public. Not even members of Congress get to see.
It was Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Sixth Man to Walk on the Moon, a guy that I filmed a bunch with. When he died, this memo was in his archive. It wasn't something the public was supposed to see. But additionally, when this got out, it shows this guy Wilson, Admiral Wilson, who I believe was the J2 at the time. The J2 has oversight over all the black budget SAPs. And he was furious that he didn't have access to one of them, let's say, I don't know, at Lockheed. Whose job is it to not let people know the fundamental nature of reality that we live in? As we've always suspected, the CIA has a lot of communication and oversight and kind of their hands in a lot of these retrieval programs.
Let's say Marco Rubio convinces the Pentagon or Lockheed Martin, let me into the hangar, let me see the craft. Oh, there's the bodies. He gets to see that with his own eyes and then goes back and what? Can he say it?
You've got a guy who did the investigation, provided that to the inspector general, and said, here is the street address of where this UFO material is being held. Can we assume that this craft that Dr. Lukatsky has direct firsthand knowledge of is exactly what Lockheed has?
You're telling us, you told us, because you were allowed to tell us, that our government has a UFO in its possession and has been able to access the inside of it, right?
Yes.
Well,
It's delicate. It's
Why is it delicate?
our enemies. And our enemies, you can be sure they're listening to this show right now.
I don't think anybody involved with the cover-up should face any prison time. Let's move on.
I'm with you on that up to a point. There are lines that should not be crossed.
Like what?
If you threaten to kill somebody, or if you actually do silence them through violence.
Got you.
That's
Agreed.
I got in touch with Lockheed Martin a few weeks ago and I said, look, there's these allegations that you have in your possession non-human materials. Do you, Lockheed Martin? And they were like, any questions to do with UAP needs to go to the US government. I'm like, okay, do I also need to go to the US government to find out if you've got Santa's sleigh as well?
And mind you, right, this was also kind of brought up during the hearings that took place this past November in 2024, where Luis Elizondo and Eric Burleson, right, Representative Eric Burleson, had a conversation kind of in this realm, right? Take a look.
Mr. Burleson, I'll recognize you for 5 minutes of questions, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Elizondo, does any branch of the United States government or defense contractors possess technology
Sir, there's documentation that I believe was submitted for the record that was approved for release by the U.S. Pentagon, by the Department of Defense Office of Pre-Publication Security Review, and it states one of the reasons why my predecessor program, OSAP, was trying to collect material of unknown origin.
Was it successfully collected?
It was not. What happened is that there was an aerospace contract company that requested to divest itself of the material that was collected in the 1950s. Unfortunately, that didn't actually occur.
So let's dive into that. That's the Bigelow Airspace, correct? So
yes, sir.
There was a journalist, Christopher Sharp, who said that there was a transfer between Lockheed Martin, Bigelow Airspace, and the CIA allegedly blocked this. Can you describe that?
What I can say is that it was blocked. Why it was blocked, I can only surmise. I was part of some conversations later on with some of those contract personnel where they had told all of us that is accurate. What we required was a memo from the Secretary of the Air Force in order to make that complete, and that never occurred. And so when Secretary Mattis became Secretary of Defense, I decided it would be appropriate for me to try to receive a memo from him as SecDef, as Secretary of Defense, if we could not get a memo from the Secretary of the Air Force to transfer that material.
So if that material exists today, who's in possession?
Sir, I wouldn't be able to have that conversation in an open hearing.
So again, this is absolutely fascinating, and kind of sounds like there's more than one aerospace company that potentially may have some recovered UFOs. Again, I find this story about Lockheed Martin in 2000, 2008, 2007, 2008 just to be absolutely fascinating, right? The fact that potentially they've had craft since the 1950s and just haven't figured it out, right? And are finally ready to just potentially give it back, right? Like, hey, we can't do anything with it, right? Which is fascinating. But I would also say, why would you give it back if you haven't figured it out yet? Wouldn't you just keep it indefinitely? Maybe that's why they blocked the transfer, because that's allegedly what happened, right? They set this thing up, they were going to do it, and then boom, the rug gets pulled, right? So that's fascinating as well, because I think if you're Lockheed Martin, you don't give it up unless you figured it out, right? Because otherwise, why would you give it up? Right, you would just keep working on it forever, right? It doesn't make any sense. But regardless, fascinating story. And you know what? Someone else in the field who I respect a lot, Richard Dolan, recently talked about this as well, right, after the hearing. And I found it to be fascinating, right, because he kind of breaks down the story pretty easily, right, to just kind of sum it up here at the end. Take a listen.
Lou, on one occasion, was asked by Representative Tim Burleson of Missouri about a very important story, and I'm glad Burleson mentioned this. It is the claim that during the 2007-2008 OSAP years, it's the first iteration of what became ATIP, that there was an attempted transfer of non-human technology from Lockheed Martin to Bigelow Aerospace. Now, Bigelow Aerospace was the primary contractor to the OSAP program under the DIA. Robert Bigelow is very good friends with Senator Harry Reid. Reid was really the sponsor of all of this OSAP program. And so what we learned about a week before the hearing, in a bit of very good journalism, was that it looks as though Lockheed Martin was going to transfer non-human technology to Bigelow Aerospace, and that was blocked twice by a senior CIA executive named Glenn Gaffney. So I was very glad when Burleson asked Luis Elizondo, who was at OSAP at this time, if he knew about the story and was it true. And Elizondo essentially said, yes. This was a really important confirmation. He said, from my, a lot of qualifications, of course. My understanding is that it was blocked. Why, I cannot surmise. He wouldn't want to put himself out there. But he gave, I think, very good support to this story, and in fact, gave a lot of support to it. Go through the transcript. So this is interesting, and it makes me think, what was the original purpose of OSAP? It wasn't just a study of the Skinwalker Ranch. It wasn't just a study of UFOs in general. It was very possibly an attempt to unburden Lockheed from its cache of NHI technology, because apparently according to this account, Lockheed didn't want it anymore. Lockheed had gotten it back in the 1950s. Maybe they'd studied all that they could. Maybe it was becoming a burden for them. I don't really know, but this is what it may look like. So that was an interesting thing that came out in the hearings.
I don't know, y'all. Again, one of the most fascinating stories in UFO history, in my opinion. Will we come back to it with Lockheed Martin, right? Will we come back to try to work something out here, right? It's 2025. It's been almost 20 years since that happened, right? And what about these other aerospace companies, right? What if they have some stuff? I don't know. I just, again, find this absolutely fascinating. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. We'll see you guys on tomorrow's video. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.